Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today I'll be sharing a traumatic birth story, so this is your warning that this birth does contain live cesarean birth footage, as well as the mention of birth trauma. This was shared on Badassmotherbirther's page, and I reached out to the parent who experienced the birth trauma and did ask for permission to share this on my channel. They said that it was okay that I shared this to help get their story out. You may have seen it on her Instagram, but it's going to provide a few talking points for this video.
No pressure, Abby. A lot of pressure. You're doing great, Abby.
Give it again. A little further back. Yeah, there you go. There we go. Now we got it rotated. Hello, Abby. Hello, good morning to you. I know. Not let you go. Make sure there's not a cord. No cord.
She's so chunky.
Oh my God, really? Okay, relax. Relax. Okay, now
Pressure here, Abby. You're doing great.
There you go. Relax. Let me get a little behind you. Okay, go. Yep. His little shoulder. Yep, there we go.
The mama wrote Badassmotherbirther, "This was my birth, something I never expected and everything I didn't want for my birth, all because I felt pressured and told I had to be induced. I wasn't even 40 weeks yet. Yes, my daughter is healthy and absolutely a dream, but her birth to me was everything but. It was very traumatic to me. I felt stolen from. It was nothing like my son's. I wasn't able to watch her come into the world, but only through a video my amazing husband took. He didn't get to cut the cord. She was so purple when she arrived due to fluid that couldn't be pushed out because of the C-section. In no way am I saying that birth by cesarean isn't birth. It's the fact that my doctor pushed an induction for no reason other than her own schedule, which resulted in a C-section due to no progress. And I told her from the beginning of pregnancy I didn't want to be induced. It's saddening to me that this is the reality of American medicine, especially when living in a state where home birth is illegal in NC. I'll read the rest of that post in a minute because it has some statistics and facts about childbirth in America. I just want to comment on a few things that stood out to me when I read this birth story. One of them is that yes, your baby is healthy. And yes, that's very important that your baby's healthy. But I like that this birther also acknowledged it was still traumatic and that her experience still matters regardless of anyone's health. Just because you can be physically healthy doesn't mean that you're mentally healthy or emotionally healthy after a bad birth experience. A traumatic birth can impact your life in so many ways. They weren't able to be a part of their own experience. Her induction was kind of planned around her provider's schedule, which is not okay. That is not a good reason for induction. And aside from that, this birther also wasn't able to watch her baby come into the world. Her husband wasn't able to cut the cord. That definitely makes it feel like something was stolen or taken from you. I wanted to share some from this evidence-based birth research article because an induction can lead to a cesarean when a provider fails to wait. Failure to progress is determined when a mother's cervix does not make any change after so many hours. Historically, evidence has shown that many care providers do not give women the chance to progress in the first stage of labor, or enough time to push the baby out when they do get there. This is a different article. This is a research article from ACOG. More than 4 in 10 of first-time mothers who had cesareans for failure to progress had not reached 5 centimeters dilation before they were taken to surgery. 6 centimeters is now considered the beginning of active labor. So this means that many of these people were still in very early labor, or maybe not truly in labor at all, when they were told that they weren't dilating fast enough. Badassmotherbirther wrote some facts right here under this birth story. It says the cesarean rate in the U.S. is 30 to 32%. That's 1 out of every 3 births. NCBI estimates that the overall rate in the U.S. will remain 27 to 30% for the immediate future, but as more states move to recognize the independent practice of midwifery and more payers seek lower cost options for childbirth, they anticipate the overall rate will drop to 20 to 25%. But this will not happen until another 15 years or more, and that reduction will still be higher than what the World Health Organization recommends for optimal health, which is a cesarean rate of 10 to 15%. This means not only 10 to 15% of cesarean sections are actually medically necessary, and more than half of our national cesarean rate could have been avoided and is unnecessary. So this birther's story was really close to home because she also mentioned North Carolina, which is where I am, and this is where I had my traumatic birth, and I kind of have a feel of what the healthcare is like around here, and it is not easily accessible to have a midwife or childbirth support. The difference between a certified nurse midwife and certified professional midwife is basically the schooling. And a certified nurse midwife would work under an obstetrician who would give an okay for them to attend a home birth. There aren't many certified nurse midwives in North Carolina to do that. And that means that not only is it not easy to find a certified nurse midwife, but things like Medicaid and insurance like that can't really cover a home birth. But I think some people with certified professional midwives may get away with it. I don't really know how that works. I could be saying all of this wrong, but to my understanding and to my best knowledge, that's how it is. So let's move on to talk about induction. There's different kinds of induction. There's medical induction, there's natural induction methods, and I'll kind of read off a short list. Some different inductions include medications, prostaglandins, which ripens the cervix, like synthetic oxytocin or oxytocin, which is like Pitocin, an intervention like rupture of membranes and breaking your water. These are all forms of induction. When you're in a situation where your provider is suggesting induction, I just want to give you one little tip to always use your brain. And that means that you're going to ask yourself, what are the benefits of this? What are the risks? What are the alternatives? What does your intuition or gut tell you? And what if you do nothing? And of course, some of us have heard about something called the Cascade of Interventions, and induction can kind of lead to that. According to childbirthconnection.org, a few reasons for the Cascade of Interventions include using various medications to induce labor, artificially breaking the membrane surrounding the baby and releasing amniotic fluid before or during labor, using synthetic oxytocin medicine, Pitocin, to make labor move faster, giving medications for pain relief laboring in bed versus being upright and moving about. My own definition of the Cascade of Interventions is you take a normal physiologic birth and you intervene with Pitocin and induction, and then the birther feels that they need some sort of relief because contractions become longer, stronger, harder, and way more intense with Pitocin. Of course, the birther wants some sort of pain relief, which could be pain medicine or maybe an epidural. And then after the epidural, let's just make this scenario say that the baby's heart rate drops, or the epidural actually slows labor and they have to up the Pitocin even more. So the Cascade of Interventions can result in a cesarean birth. If that makes sense, I'm not sure if I'm good at explaining things. This can occur and this can be traumatic to some birthing people who did not expect that to happen or who did not want all of these things to happen, who maybe wanted to opt for natural birth. Of course, there are different reasons for induction and even cesarean, and that can even be an elective choice. You can have an elective induction or an elective cesarean, and that is no one's business but yours and your provider's. And what's important is that you were able to make that choice for yourself, your baby, and your body and your birth. That's the most important thing, is that you are consenting to what is happening. You are making your own informed and evidence-based choices around your birth experience. This is what is so important about the Cascade of Interventions, is the way that birthers feel at the end of the day. On Childbirth Connection it says, "In many instances, these practices cause problems because they disrupt the normal physiology of pregnancy, labor, and birth by interfering with hormones that move labor and birth along, creating opportunities for infection, having undesirable effects on your baby, making it harder for you to push your baby out." When these effects happen, women may feel that their bodies have failed them, not realizing that the things that went wrong could have actually been triggered by maternity practices themselves. Now we're going to move on to reasons for a cesarean, and first off, this should never be out of convenience for your provider or a holiday, much like being induced should never be out of convenience for your provider or a holiday. A cesarean is major surgery, but it's still your choice to make, and you have that decision. If you might choose to have an elective cesarean, and that's okay. According to ICANN's website, this is not a comprehensive list, but here are a few common reasons a provider might recommend a cesarean. Obstetrical emergencies like prolapsed cord, placenta abruption, placenta previa, eclampsia or preeclampsia. Other common reasons are fetal malrepresentation, such as transverse, breech, CPD, meaning that the head is too large to fit through the pelvis, maternal medical conditions like active herpes lesion, severe hypertension, diabetes, fetal distress. But this is just things that we hear. It's also important to make note that ICANN says under fetal distress, this is a hot topic with the recent studies indicating that continuous electronic fetal monitoring increases the cesarean rate and does not show a relative increase in better outcomes. Discuss with your care provider how they define fetal distress and what steps are used to remedy situation before a cesarean. My doula friend Emily and I, who is trauma informed, talked a little bit about continuous fetal monitorings, which are general rule once you are induced. Constantly monitored like that can make it seem like problems are arising when they really aren't, if that makes sense. They can assume that the baby is in some sort of distress and take you to surgery. Right now at this time, hospitals have all sorts of different policies. Here in North Carolina, some doulas aren't allowed, some hospitals are beginning to allow some in, some hospitals are drug testing doulas, so it is all wonky donkey here in North Carolina. It can make childbirth support even less accessible to many. It makes virtual childbirth support an option, but it's not like the real thing. However, it's still a very good option. And Emily and I discussed this too, like why are hospitals creating all these weird policies that seem to have nothing to do with COVID, and I want to do interviews with other people on this who are in the midst of all these crazy hospital policies. It makes sense that healthcare providers are probably really nervous about COVID, trying to control the flow of healthcare, who's in and out of the hospitals, how many beds they have. You know, partners, husbands, wives may not be allowed in the birthing room in some hospitals, or at least at appointments like ultrasounds and special moments like that. Honestly, it doesn't really make sense to take away that support, you know, for like a prenatal visit. I can understand some things. Right now, the birth world is pretty scary because a lot of people are having to do it completely alone. So there are many websites and resources and places where you can get support right now to help you prepare for your birth in these situations. Think of all types of different questions that you can ask your provider about your birth and about what would happen if this happened and that. As we know, birth trauma is not an easy thing to talk about, let alone experience. It can take years and maybe even a lifetime of processing all that's happened to you. It's important that we understand and respect that any type of birth can be a traumatic birth experience. No matter what the birther experienced, their experience is still valid, and we really can't question something that we haven't personally been through because we don't know what their birth was like through their eyes. Birth trauma often results in PTSD or postpartum post-traumatic stress disorder. 1 in 3 birthing people who have given birth may have experienced birth trauma. It always seems to be that the baby's healthy and that's good enough for everyone. But it's really not good enough. We have to do so much better for people. No matter what kind of birth you had, if you thought that it was traumatic, I believe you, and it's valid. Please share your story if you're comfortable in doing so. Please try to reach out for help, and I'll leave those resources in the description below. The more we give these stories a platform and share these stories and talk about them openly like this, the more people can be like, oh yeah, that wasn't right, that wasn't okay, maybe my birth was traumatic, or maybe it'll make people who are in the medical field think a little bit more, or it will just bring awareness in general. And so many people will know that they're not alone. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you'd like, and I'll see you next time.